Well, no game for the Cardinals on Saturday due to the rain, but we did get an interesting roster move with Michael McGreevy getting the promotion to the big leagues. What's going on there? Coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It is Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. Cardinals rained out on Saturday. I believe some of the fans might have been able to get into the ballpark, into Busch Stadium, for their Brendan Donovan bobblehead, but that was about the extent of the action at the ballpark this afternoon. As the rainiest April, it seems like, in the history of the universe, at least locally, has extended into May, and we're still getting this freaking weather. But we do have a chance to record B-Schaeff Daily today because we have a topic to talk about. Cardinals helped us out there. Michael McGreevy getting the call up to the big leagues on Saturday morning. Even though the team didn't play on Saturday, he'll be around presumably for Sunday. And we want to talk about that because it is kind of an interesting move when you consider where the Cardinals have been in terms of prioritizing Michael McGreevy's development, right? They didn't want to bring him up just to stick him in the bullpen for the month of April. He had a really good spring for the Cardinals. He was vying for a starting rotation spot, and you didn't see what you normally see over the course of the past, decade or so from the Cardinals every spring, is at least one starting pitcher gets hurt. That didn't happen, and it created a little bit of a dilemma, a numbers game that played out not to the favor of Michael McGreevy at the end of it. We recall McGreevy coming up toward the end of 2024 and pitching pretty well for the Cardinals in limited duty. In the season of 2024, he ended up starting 3 total games, appearing in 4, and having a 1.96 big league ERA in 23 innings, striking out 18 batters. In spring training, we saw a very good version of Michael McGreevy as he pitched 16 2/3 innings for the Cardinals in the Grapefruit League this year, and allowed only a couple of runs for a 1.08 earned run average in those 16 innings. Not a huge strikeout guy, just 12 Ks in those 16 2/3, but limited base runners. And that's the name of the game. 0.60 was the whip for McGreevy in Jupiter, and he allowed an opposing batting average of 167. Really, Michael McGreevy was as good as any Cardinals starter in spring. I mean, if I'm sorting these stats here by the guys who started games, Steven Matz had a 2.29 ERA. Matthew Liberatore only got the one start, but he pitched the same number of innings as we saw McGreevy get, actually identical, 16 2/3. 1.62 ERA. He was fantastic. McGreevy had a 1.08 ERA. He had the best stats of anyone in spring. And there has been this permeating disappointment, which I think is fair from Cardinals fans, that wonders why Michael McGreevy didn't get a look out of camp, considering this was supposed to be a development year, a transition year where you're learning more about the guys that could be part of your future. And obviously that Michael McGreevy would have been earmarked for that category. And he couldn't have looked any better in spring. So why not McGreevy for the rotation to begin the season? Well, like we talked about, it's a numbers game. And they wanted to prioritize Matthew Liberatore, who's a little bit further down the path toward, hey, what is this guy? We need to find out and decide. And I think he was teetering on that edge of permanent relief status. He was going to go into that Cardinal bullpen. And the Cardinals said, well, wait a minute. This guy wants to be a starter. This guy has showed us the stuff out of the bullpen that suggests he could be a really good reliever. Let's give him one last look in the rotation. And if it doesn't go well, then, at least we saw it. And we gave Matthew Liberatore, under the most standard of circumstances, a chance to thrive in the rotation. And if he doesn't do it, we did our level best. It's not going to be like those other pitchers, the Sandy Alcantaras, the Zach Gallens of the world, where we cast them aside a little bit too soon. We didn't know really what they were fully capable of. We gave him every opportunity. If he doesn't succeed now, he's never going to. Like, you can rest easy putting a guy into a box after that kind of runway. That's why we use that word runway to begin 2025. So that's what they did with Liberatore, and guess what? It's panning out for them. He's looked really, really good. I know it didn't go very deep in his last start. Totally not his fault. Rain delay means that there's just no other way to approach it. He threw 3 innings, and we'll see Liberatore again here before too long, probably against the Pirates this coming week. And it ends up being the right decision for the Cardinals. Now, you can make the case that, well, Miles Michaelis, Steven Matz, why did the Cardinals need to prioritize those guys? Right? They're on the final years of their contracts. You could just cast them aside and let them go. Yeah, you're paying them, but that's called the sunk cost fallacy. Trying to throw good after bad, there's just no way to think that these guys are going to turn things around, right? That's why a lot of Cardinals fans felt. Just give us the young guys. We want to see McGreevy. We want to see Schaeffer. A lot of fans felt that way. I defended the Cardinals for the way that they have handled the rotation in the early portion. You stick with Michaelis through the early portion of the season. You get as many looks at Steven Matz as you can. And largely that's actually panned out. I know the Cardinal record has not been good. It's not been a favorable start to the season after the first month and a week or so that we have followed the Cardinals. But it's not because of the rotation, and it's not outside of one game that they lost where it was the fault of Miles Michaelis. He's at a 2.39 ERA. You might say, well, Brenden, all the games count. They do. But if we're grading how much or little value has been added by these guys that are essentially replacing the McGreevys of the world that you'd like to see get these opportunities so far, Miles Michaelis has given you those chances to win where the bats just haven't backed him up or the bullpen just hasn't backed him up. He's had one brutal start, and he can't have another one, or I think we're having a different conversation. Because the deeper into the season you get, and the more it looks like the Cardinals aren't contending, the more I think the impetus to showcase those younger players and see if they can grab hold of a rotation spot for next year becomes all that much more imperative. There's time on the calendar still right now in May to where Michael McGreevy doesn't necessarily have to be in the rotation every fifth day to be able to determine his availability for that role in 2026. Like if we're in August and the Cardinals sell at the deadline, they're still not showing McGreevy and he doesn't get a dozen or more starts in the big leagues this year, then you can say they might have squandered that chance for him. But I still think there's a little bit of time with this calendar to where I was okay with how the Cardinals handled April. Even after a bad Michaelis outing, I did say I got pretty close to looking at it and saying, look, if he has another one, maybe you pull the plug on this early because he's not helping you. He's not adding anything for the future, certainly with an expiring contract, and he's not adding anything for the present other than just an arm to go out there and make life more difficult on your bullpen, essentially, is what it felt like could happen for Miles. But he's turned things around to this point, and I think if you're the Cardinals, just the fact that you haven't had any injuries is why it feels like you've got all this pitching depth right now. But they handled it well because most teams don't get through spring and April without any pitching injuries to their rotation. Like, that's an outlier. This hasn't happened in a decade of me covering the Cardinals, basically, starting in 2016. So they approached it in a way that I think was more than defensible. But now the microscope kind of does get ratcheted up a notch, where you're looking close at Eric Fetty. In my opinion, should be. You're looking close at Miles Michaelis. What happens as we get into the summer a little bit deeper, as maybe, hopefully, some of those other AAA arms start to acquit themselves, or maybe some of the guys that have been injured could come back. We know that Cooper Jerpy won't be back this year, but what's the status of Quinn Matthews? What's the status of Tim Kentz? How much are we going to see of those guys in 2025? Without him, it does get more difficult. The depth options there, if you do start to experience some injuries as the season goes along with your rotation, it gets dangerous to where you're really going to be hurting for arms. You don't want to bring up guys that aren't competitive at the big league level based on their minor stats, and you don't want to bring up guys that you rush their development if you have some prospects you like, but they're not far enough along. You just don't want to get into that situation and hamper the development of players that could have otherwise had good runway to get their work into the minors and work their way up on a timely schedule. You don't want that. So having these guys around, I think, is more than fine. And maybe you get lucky and a Michaelis or a Matz builds some trade value before the July deadline, and you're able to actually get something for these guys that at the beginning of the year you kind of thought were deadweight contracts. We'll see if that can end up materializing. I would be surprised if it does for Michaelis, who does have a no trade. Steven Matz could definitely garner some trade interest if the Cardinals put him in the right situations to keep succeeding and he looks good. A lefty arm where he's getting up to mid-90s at times, a little more velocity, I think, potential for him. That's the guy that I think could actually add to his trade value, even more so than Eric Fetty, which is why I've talked about, like, I don't know what I would do. I know you can make the case that the Cardinals need a third lefty in their bullpen, but it might not matter. Like, if the Cardinals aren't, like, the third lefty in your bullpen is something that you care more about if you're a team that's on the cusp of the playoffs. And if they can't play their way into that conversation, I don't really care who the third lefty is. Like, just have those guys in the bullpen figure it out or don't. And yeah, you'll lose more games because of it. But I also think if you have Steven Matz who can build value as a starter, if he's going to continue the way that he's pitched recently, I'd rather see him in that rotation than in the bullpen. And whether that's a possibility for the Cardinals, we'll see. He's got a 1.50 ERA through 24 innings, so Matz has looked good as a starter, looks good as a reliever, and we'll see what ends up happening with his role and maybe how the McGreevy thing impacts that. So getting to the crux of the conversation today, why is Michael McGreevy getting the call right now? I think it is less exciting and more simple than a lot of people are probably hoping. No, I don't believe it's a sign that he's ready to join the Cardinal rotation. I mean, he's ready. I don't think the Cardinals are ready to have him. And it's frustrating, and it's valid that it's frustrating, but I don't think that it's wrong for the Cardinals to keep these other guys as the depth in the early portion of the season. It's a totally different conversation when we get to June and July and you get deeper into it. But right now, I think Michael McGreevy is simply here for protection. That's the word that Oliver Marmol used. Reading from John Denton's Twitter account this afternoon, Cardinals manager Ollie Marmol said that Michael McGreevy is in St. Louis for, quote, protection, meaning he can offer several innings if starters struggle today or tomorrow. And this was before we knew that the rain was going to postpone Saturday's game. Rain interrupting the next two games, adds John Denton, and knocking out starters is also a consideration. So imagine a world where the Cardinals don't decide to bang Saturday's game. Like the weather radar clears up a little bit and they give it a go, but then after 2 or 3 innings, an hour rain delay comes and Eric Fetty has to be knocked from the game. If you didn't have that coverage with guys like Roddery Munoz throwing a couple of innings yesterday, and so he's the one that gets optioned for McGreevy, if you didn't have that coverage in that event where that happened on Saturday, they would have been totally screwed. So that's where the coverage comes from for Michael McGreevy. And I don't believe he is scheduled to start either Saturday or Sunday. I might have done that differently. Like if he's here, it lines up. Just let him start one of those 2 games. Keep him on turn. Don't mess with his development and the flow of his season. That's one change I would have made. It's doing a little too much, and I see why the Cardinals aren't apparently going to do that. I think it's going to be Fetty and Palante for the 2 games on Sunday. That's totally understandable. You prioritize the guys that are in your rotation, and the guys that aren't have to be a little bit more flexible. I do hope they give an opportunity for McGreevy to kind of do what Graceffo did the other day in relief of Matz and throw 4 or 5 innings of relief. Like, if one of those starters only gets you through 4 or 5, or even if one of them goes 6, have McGreevy finish the game. If it's not a close game, maybe the Cardinals are up 6-2, or maybe they're down 7-1. Either case, I think that would make a lot of sense to say, hey, McGreevy, just like go get your work in, throw 50, 60, 70 pitches because you're due to start anyway, and do it at the big league level. Show what you got. And look, if he makes an impression like Graceffo did on Wednesday as part of that doubleheader, then maybe it gets into a situation where the Cardinals have to pay a little bit more attention a little sooner to Michael McGreevy and getting him back to the big league level and making that more of a priority. He can force the issue on that, but they have to give him a chance to pitch. I think it would be optically a mistake and bullpen-wise a mistake just because of the amount of folks that they don't have available to them out of the bullpen for length. Like Steven Matz should be in the rotation for the Pittsburgh series. I don't know for sure that he will be. Checking on the Cardinals website, I still don't see anything announced in the way of probables past Sunday. Well, okay, no, Michaelis has been listed for Monday, Liberatore for Tuesday, Gray for Wednesday. I don't know if that's from something that Oliver Marmol said this morning or if that's just kind of the team site speculating a little bit. If that's the case, though, it would imply that Matz is done in the rotation. And so we'll see. I would firmly disagree with that. But you know what? I'm not managing the Cardinals, and so it's not my call. They're going to have different priorities, and we'll see what ends up happening and whether or not that schedule that has recently popped up today on Cardinals.com, whether that's something that sticks or not. Sonny Gray for Wednesday. He pitched Friday, so you talk about Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. There'd be 5 days of rest, back to a 5-man rotation. And checking some of the reports from the writers that were at Busch this morning, which I was not there, missed all the fun. I saw John Gruden in the clubhouse. That was probably pretty cool. I'm not entirely sure how ironclad that rotation plan is for next week. For me, I would have Steven Matz starting against the Pirates because I would want another look at it. And then he's not the guy that you bump back to the bullpen, in my opinion, if he looks good again. You let him go. And he maybe builds you value. He maybe helps you win games. The third lefty is not a priority to me over getting the best 5 in the rotation. And when it's putting up an Eric Fetty against another guy and Steven Matz, who they're both on expiring deals, and like Michaelis is in this conversation too, but he's looked better recently. I don't think his spot's in jeopardy. Like, I would want to see what Eric Fetty does tomorrow, and then I would say, all right, maybe we bump him to the bullpen for a spell, and we keep this going with Matz, and put him in the rotation for next week and see what happens. Or really, you just start Steven Matz against the Pirates, and then you can decide, right? Because this is going to be Sunday. It starts Steven Matz on Monday, right? He pitched Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Would be on regular 5-day rest or 4 days of rest in an every 5th day situation if he were to pitch on Monday. I don't know. I could see the benefit of that. And then those two would be locked in next to each other in the rotation. And with off day Thursday, you could slot either into the rotation against the Nationals, whichever one you wanted to choose. If that was a decision, I don't think the Cardinals are considering it. The Cardinals are going to move Matz back to the bullpen, is my prediction. I don't think they're considering jostling Eric Fetty. It is what I would do, or I would at least give Matz the chance to earn it by pitching him on Monday or Tuesday. Really, I think it would have to be Monday for this to work out as they move back into a 5-man rotation, but he'd be on regular rest, so he could do it. That's what I would do, and I would let the chips fall where they may from there. I'd let the Sunday start for Fetty and the Monday start for Matz be for maintaining that rotation spot. But the way that they view it, I think, is with Fetty having priority, and he's not in consideration to be moved. Again, it's not what I would do, but I think that's what we're going to see. As for McGreevy, he's there for protection. He's there to mitigate the risk of what a rain delay Saturday could have looked like, and now we obviously know there won't be one. And so he'll be able to come in to that Schaeffer role on Sunday in one of those games to help keep the rest of the bullpen fresh, because you still have that Pirates series before an off day Thursday. And that'll be the way McGreevy is used. And then he'll be back to Memphis Monday or Sunday night. And Schaeffer, I think, would be an obvious candidate to come back up if you were still looking to have some length out of the bullpen. It's a nightmare if you're Ben Johnson, right? If you're the manager of the Memphis Redbirds, it's a nightmare to have the more capable starters in your rotation for that Memphis team be constantly kind of taken away from you, and they're back there to hang out. Really, is all it would be for Schaeffer, because he was the 27th man. You can call him back up without waiting the 15 days. So I bet that is a consideration for Monday, and he'll get swapped with McGreevy. And then Schaeffer actually does stay on the roster for a little while, serving in a bullpen capacity, which honestly I think should happen. It's pretty attractive to me when you see him pumping 98, 99. I think he was touching as close to 99 on the radar gun as you can in his outing on Wednesday. What does that play like out of the bullpen? I'd like to see Schaeffer considered for the starting rotation in 2026, but he could also carve out a role as a bullpen guy if he can hone the fastball and continue maintaining that type of velocity and decide which of his off-speed pitches are going to be best suited for a bullpen, shorter stint, shorter burst capacity where you only face each batter in the lineup one time. Even if you go, 2-3 innings, you don't see anybody a second time. You can be a little bit more selective with your repertoire. I think that'd be an interesting role that we could get a chance to see play out for Schaeffer. And then later on in the season, if the trade deadline comes and goes and you've moved on from a number of these guys who are on expiring deals, the rotation looks completely different. As it's only May the 3rd, though, as we speak here, I'm okay with the Cardinals still, for the most part, making moves roster-wise outside of their tenets of, like, Gorman's going to have to get playing time, Walker's going to have to play, find out what these guys are, let them sink or swim. Outside of that, I'm okay with the Cardinals still making moves to try and win games here and see if they can't claw their way back into a 500 record and into the conversation in the NL Central before it's all said and done. But by the same token, I think there will come a point in time this season where you let all that go and you say the only thing that matters is playing young guys. And then it gets to include Sajaci, because maybe you trade Arenado ahead of the deadline. But I know that a lot of people are talking about the injury to Tristan Casas and how that may relate back to the Cardinals, because they've got a ton of first basemen. They can find a first baseman in Boston and have Arenado play third. Bregman could shift over. I think he's already playing some second base. And so, a lot of different things could happen there where Arenado maybe comes back into play for the Red Sox, who are a contending caliber team. And they may decide that, after all, we do want Nolan Arenado. Maybe that happens soon. Like, maybe that happens in May when you don't normally see trades, because the Cardinals are tired of, every single day kind of scratching their heads going, how do we find a way to get all the time for Gorman that we want, all the time for Walker that we want, all the time for Burleson that we want, and then eventually recall Thomas Saggese? We can't possibly do it. And Arenado is the one, cog in that machine where if you remove him, everything else flows very smoothly as it pertains to playing time. It does not flow smoothly as it pertains to the Cardinals winning games. And so if you do trade Arenado in the month of May, you're sending the message that, nope, this ain't our year. And that's already kind of known, I think, deep down throughout that building. It's kind of known that this is what we're looking at this year. But, they have at least through spring and through the early portion of the season tried to maintain that, optimism of, we're going to go out there and try to win games and see where we are, right? But from a front office standpoint, that clashes a little bit with what would be really easy to do is say, get what you can for Arenado. A team like Boston might be desperate and might reconsider it, and Boston, and Arenado rather, I think would be happy to go and approve a trade like that at this point, because the Cardinals aren't winning, and as much as it's possible to turn things around, you're only 5 weeks or so into the season. It's not one of those deals where you necessarily expect them to turn it around based on the current record, and there have been tenets of their game that you feel like lend itself toward the Cardinals potentially finding that rhythm as time goes along in 2025, but there's also plenty working against them at this point, to where maybe the guys that you're hoping are going to be consistent, they're not getting the consistent playing time, and so you're not maybe going to get the production from them that you need. Maybe they do call it early. I don't think they will, but if there was something that could kind of jar that loose, it would be an injury like the one that Casas had. He's going to be out for a while for the Red Sox. And again, this is the kind of stuff we're taking time to talk about. I'm not predicting it. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But if the Cardinals continue on the path they're on, very distinct possibility that Arenado is traded before the deadline still. And then you're talking about, well, what if that's the way it looks? Suddenly, how does Wilson Contreras feel about staying? Like, it was easy to say you wanted to stay and you wanted to see it through, and he had a lot of great things to say, and I think he's an unbelievable teammate for what he has endured in St. Louis and has been willing to push through it and just be a consummate pro. I think he deserves all the credit in the world. But if they're really tearing the thing down, do you see maybe a different feeling on it from guys like Contreras and Sonny Gray, where they say, all right, you've traded Arenado, or you're working to do so, and it's clear that whether it's the Dodgers or the Red Sox or the Padres or somebody that's going, all right, we now need this guy for the push. We've seen injuries. We've seen what our current third baseman situation is. The guys we thought would do well, maybe they're not. Like, things open up. And I think those landing spots that Arenado would be appreciative of could come to fruition in a way that just weren't opening up in spring. And so if that happens and you're Sonny or you're Wilson, do you go, all right, I don't want to leave necessarily, but I'm open to it because I can see, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel on it's mid-July, and I could be pitching in the postseason in 3 months instead of, slogging through the rest of a summer in St. Louis where that's not where it's heading. Like, those are the things that we can't know today, even though we think we do. A lot of fans would say, oh, the Cardinals stink. We know what they are. But I think you might know more about it, and it can be more crystallized and more definitive when you get to July. So we'll see what it ends up looking like there, but those are some of the things that I think we will be talking about and thinking about as the months progress. But Michael McGreevy, hopefully you get a chance to see him pitch at Busch Stadium on Sunday. It does seem like it'll be in a relief role, but he was there for protection. I know that's not the exciting news that everybody was hoping it would be, but you look at the numbers game, they still don't have room for him in the rotation until they figure out what they're doing with these other guys. And I think we're still a little bit of ways away from them making more bold decisions, even with these guys who are on the expiring contracts, where it might be the right business move. And, if this team really was out of it for this year, it might be worthwhile to say, you can jettison one or two of these guys and just roll with the youngsters that you have. The risk on the backside of that when you get to August, September is having not enough pitching left, though. And so I continue to use the phrase, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I think that's where the Cardinals are going to be continually with this group of pitchers. And maybe all three of them, talking about Michaelis, Fedde, and Matz, could end up having value at the deadline. In addition to Sonny, who I know Sonny didn't pitch well yesterday in Friday's game, but I think he's going to be having value if he's willing to waive the no trade at some point in time. And if it does end up where the Cardinals kind of tried to halfway in, halfway out, keep the band together to an extent, once Arenado trade didn't come to fruition, if they're 10, 15 games below 500 in the middle of the summer, it's clear that this is more of a rebuild than they wanted it to be. And so I think for 2026, you don't necessarily need to keep Contreras around. You don't necessarily need to keep Sonny Gray around. You try to compel those guys to be moved for the no-trade clauses and get something for them. It's not going to be what anybody cares about, but that means DeWitt gets to slash payroll even more. But it also means that instead of, wondering about fitting all these pieces together, Contreras, is gone from first base. You can play Burley there every day, or you can play Herrera there some as you get more of a look at Pages, and you get more of a look at Herrera. He gets to bat every day, right? And Gorman gets to play. So JC probably comes up by then. Like, you could see a completely different Cardinal team by August. They will lose a ton of games if that happens. But that may be what it ends up taking to try and determine who's part of this ship and who's going to be shipped out by Chaim Bloom in the offseason. Could be all of the types of conversations we're having. And so I still think, as bleak as it might be, if that's the way it goes, and I'm still not convinced the Cardinals are going to be dreadful this year. We'll see. They've got to turn some things around for sure. But if that is the way that it goes, I think our conversations honestly get more interesting as we start to identify, what those trade possibilities could be and who could emerge as pieces that you're excited about for 2026 and beyond. So my advice, stay tuned to B-Schaeff Daily. Stay tuned to the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals writer YouTube channel, as well as Sports Hub STL for all the content we're doing over there on that YouTube page. And I think the Cardinals can at least be interesting this summer, even if they aren't a winning team. I'm not ready to concede it yet, but I know a lot of people would say, you're being a homer if you suggest they're not going to be bad this year. We'll see, man. I think they've got some pieces that are still interesting, but they certainly have got to play more consistently if they're going to get anywhere close to a 500 record this year. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys for joining me, as always, for B-Schaeff Daily, and we'll talk to you now next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.